I will start sharing my screen, and I will share the last slide where I ended my class. Just to confirm, are you able to see the presentation? Anyone?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. So let us begin. And I am putting on my camera. So in the last lecture, I discussed the meaning of diagnosis, and I said that the term diagnosis has been borrowed from medical sciences, where it means understanding the nature of pathology or disorder or disease in terms of its cause or etiology. However, in psychological sciences, in clinical psychology, or in psychopathology, the term diagnosis means understanding the nature of the psychopathology in terms of its signs and symptoms. However, this meaning of diagnosis is little narrower, and in clinical psychology, some psychologists have proposed a broader definition, and they say that it is characterological diagnosis and it is a broader term which is almost equivalent to clinical assessment, where we try to understand the whole personality of the individual, the weaknesses, strengths, many other aspects. As complete as possible, we try to understand the individual in his her situation. But I said that the present classification system is in use, and we are referring diagnosis most often in our clinical practice as symptomatic or categorical diagnosis. And this diagram I shared, that psychodiagnosis is a broader term, and there are two aspects of this psychodiagnosis: characterological diagnosis and symptomatic diagnosis, and there is some overlap. Now, we will begin, or we will move forward towards how we actually make this psychodiagnostic assessment, how we reach at a diagnosis in clinical setting. And as I said earlier, that in the definitions that I shared, that psychodiagnosis is always made based on the clinical data, and the major part of the clinical data is signs and symptoms. So the first thing that I would like to discuss, what is data? Data is plural of datum, you all know. So if there is a single piece of information, like I am sharing that my salary is XXX, then this is a datum. But if I am having the salary of two or more teachers, then that will become data. So what is data? It is aggregate of different piece of informations. And the data can be qualitative and quantitative. So when we deal with statistical analysis, we generally work with quantitative data. So all the information will be in number form, numerical form. But in clinical setting, we deal with both quantitative and qualitative data. And you will come across these two terms in the next few slides if I will reach there. So I think it will be clear to you that data is aggregate of information, and this information is needed to make informed decision about the client, his or her psychopathological condition. So what is clinical data? Those information which are relevant for making the diagnosis of the patient or for planning therapy intervention. This can also be the form of clinical data. But here, since we are discussing diagnosis or psychodiagnosis, we will be focusing on those clinical data which are required for making a diagnosis. And I would again repeat that diagnosis or psychodiagnosis here in a limited or narrower sense means understanding the client and patient in terms of the signs, symptoms, and syndromes, and then classifying that individual in a predefined category based on some formal agreed upon classification systems like DSM and ICD. So the sign and symptoms are the most basic components of the clinical data. Before I make the distinction between form and content, I would like to make distinction between sign and symptoms, and I would introduce some other terms because I am using them like syndrome. I know that you all know, but since this is online mode, I will be less interactive, uh, and if needed, I will ask you. So, signs are basically the objectively observable aspect of the psychopathology. For example, uh, let us take some physical problem in the body. Like suppose I fell down while I was climbing the stairs of my department on the knees. And then suppose if I am showing you that I get a wound on my knee, so you can see the wound. So wound is the sign of that problem. You can see the swellings, you can see the blood, you can see other things. But when I will say that I am feeling a pain inside my knee, and that is some tingling sensation, it is like something is moving like a current or any other description, that thing is only experienced by me. So it is symptom, and this cannot be observed by the clinician. So symptoms are the subjectively experienced discomfort and pain in the area of psychology. For example, now translate this example in psychology. Suppose one is having depression. We can see the gloomy outlook of that person, that the face is very gloomy, he or she is feeling very sad. This is sign. He is not suppose a male is there, he is not saving, the clothes are dirty, the hairs are some scattered where they are present. So all these things are observable. On based on this, we can say that he is not taking interest in day-to-day life activities. He is very sad, like this. But when we will ask whether you are feeling this, feeling that, suppose I don't know whether what is the status of his appetite. Are you having any appetite disturbance? The patient will only be able to say yes or no. So the symptoms of depression may be the appetite disturbance, sleep disturbance, difficulty in concentration, etc. So, for understanding any psychopathological condition and for making diagnosis of that psychopathological conditions, the most important and core data, clinical data, are sign and symptoms. When certain signs and symptoms, when they co-occur together, generally if you will read the text definitions of syndrome, it will be say that it is a collection of signs and symptoms. But it is not mere a bundle of signs and symptoms. Suppose you put several signs and symptoms together, it will become syndrome. No. For a syndrome, the signs and symptoms should co-vary. This vary together. For example, if I am having a running nose, then it is very likely that I may be having cough also. I may be having fever also. So generally, running nose, cough, fever, they co-occur. These are the signs and symptoms of the seasonal flu. Similarly, in psychological sense, there are signs and symptoms. For example, in depression, there are signs and symptoms that co-occur. So, syndrome is a collection of signs and symptoms, but such signs and symptoms that generally occur together, most of them occur together in a given condition, and that forms the syndrome. And when we specify the course and duration of that syndrome, then that becomes disorder. So, depression may be a syndrome. It is, for example, you say depressive episode, it is a syndrome. But when that depressive episode continues for 2 continuous weeks daily, and some other criteria are met, and then based on this course of the syndrome, you say that the patient is having major depression. But suppose there is another patient who is having very sad mood and having this depressive syndrome for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and then he starts feeling little elated, elevated mood is there, he is very happy, very pleasant feeling, and gradually he is moving towards another syndrome which is called mania. And if this is cycling, then your diagnosis will change. The disorder will be different. Those syndromes are same, the depressive syndrome, and then another cycle, manic syndrome. But this cyclic, manic, and depressive syndrome will change the disorder to the bipolar disorder. So let me repeat it again so that it becomes clear to you that for a syndrome to be specified as disorder in psychopathology, the syndrome must be studied for its course, duration, and other aspects. So, if a syndrome is having a specific course, duration, and characteristics, then that syndrome becomes disorder or disease. So, in a very simple way, how we make diagnosis, though diagnosis is not that easy, we do a lot of things, but in a simple way, we try to understand the signs and symptoms. Then we cluster the signs and symptoms, that which signs and symptoms go together, go hand in hand. We will get different clusters of symptoms. The cluster of symptom which is more close to a predefined diagnostic category and is dominant in the person will get a label, diagnostic label, depending on its course and duration. Suppose depressive mood is going on and off, but it is existing for a period of 2 years, then it will be labeled as dysthymia. But if the depressive episode is lasting for continuous 2 weeks, and then it will become a major depression. So, based on that course and duration, we assign a label that this patient is having major depression, that person is having bipolar disorder, like this. And this is the simplest way of understanding the process of diagnosis. Now, let us move to more intricate distinctions that is needed, I think, to understand the diagnostic process. So, symptom is having two aspects. The form, you might have read till now. What is form? The description of the structure of psychological experiences in phenomenological terms. When I use the term phenomenological terms, means the subjective experience of the individual. So, delusion is a form of symptom. Depressed mood is a form. It is the structure of that symptom. And delusion involves a lot many things. The content of the symptom, on the other hand, is defined by the psychosocial environment and context within which the patient describes his or her abnormal behaviors, abnormal signs and symptoms. So, for example, take the example of delusion. If I am saying that I feel that people, or say my colleagues, are spying behind me, they are jealous of me, like this, and if you present contradictory evidences. No, no, sir, you are not having these problems. And even then I am holding that false belief, then it is called delusion. But when you will go through my content of the description, then you will say that sir is having a persecutory delusion. If someone is saying he is very big person, grand person, and there is no evidence supporting his belief, then that is also a delusion, but that delusion is delusion of grandiosity. Again, this is not the content of the symptom. Again, this is the form of the symptom. What will be the content? So some will say that I am, say, the big scientist like X, like Y. I am like Lord Hanuman. I am Christ. So these. So if I am living in Western context, I would like more likely to say that I am the Christ. If I am living here in Uttar Pradesh, I will say I am Lord Hanuman, I am Lord Shiva. I am having some delusion, but this is the content of the delusion. It will become more clear in the next few slides. So the form, that is the structure of the symptom, is dependent on the nature of the mental illness. So if one is having depressive disorder, major depression, then the form will be uh, the symptoms form will be like sad mood, lack of interest, delusion of guilt, like this. These will be the form of the symptom. But content always depends on the life situation, the culture, the society in which we are living. And so, for the same symptom, people may have different contents, different forms. Some may say that I am Lord Shiva, some may say that I am Goddess Durga. So, these are the contents. And from where it comes from the life situation, the culture, from the society. But remember that one should focus on both. Both are needed for making diagnosis. Form is necessary for making accurate diagnosis because our diagnostic classification systems are arranged in a way which is dependent on the form of the symptoms. So you will find that delusion of this, delusion of that should be present, hallucination should be present. So hallucination is the form of symptom. But when I say that I am seeing Lord Shiva, then it is content of the visual hallucination. Visual hallucination itself is, remember, form of the symptom. But when someone is saying, I am seeing my grandfather, my grandmother, this and that, when they are specifying their hallucinations, then that will be called the content of the symptoms. So, form of the symptom is needed for making diagnosis because the manuals available for making diagnosis depends on the form of the symptoms. But it does not mean that the content of the symptoms are not needed. Content of the symptom is important for understanding. They reflect the recent concerns of the individual. So, in the content of the symptom, you can infer what is the current concerns of the patient. And these contents are also helpful when we try to develop a treatment protocol, say psychotherapy protocol, then we focus on those contents as well. And as I said earlier, we should note both. But remember, the patient or his her attendant will not share the form of, they will not say, sir, I am having hallucination, delusion, depressed mood, and this. They will always share their content of the symptom. And based on those contents, suppose some will say that for last couple of days I am not sleeping well, and in the night my grandmother comes and says something in my right ear to do this and that, then I start doing that. Based on this content of symptom, you will infer in the form of the symptom that the patient is having auditory hallucination. So we generally encounter the content of the symptom, but we have to translate for making diagnosis in terms of form of the symptom, and then based on those forms, we try to specify the syndrome, and then that syndrome is specified into disease or disorder. Let us make some other distinctions also. In clinical setting, the data may be objective data. Here in clinical psychology, when we use the term objective data, it means that any data which can be verified by one or more persons. So if patient is saying that I am having difficulty in this, I generally do not have good relations with this so and so or within the family members, and the attendant is there and he or she is also saying yes, it is correct, then that information is data. That information or that data will become objective data. But there is another data, subjective data, which is a single person account of an event and behavior. So generally, the patient or their attendants, when they only provide information, for example, some information will be provided only by the attendant, that no, what he's saying is not correct, he is having this, that problem. So, or the patient is saying, no, I am having this and this problem, then these one person account will form data, but that data will be called subjective in clinical psychology in the area of psychodiagnostics. Why? Because we are not having any evidence to verify whether that information is correct or not. So when there is an agreement between two or more persons regarding any information on clinical data, then that is objective data. And when this is not, it is coming from only one person, then that is subjective data. But again, both are required, and most often the objective information will be more good and safer to act upon, but we cannot ignore the importance of the subjective data. Most of the important symptoms in psychiatry can only be identified based on the subjective account of the experience, and therefore subjective and objective data both are required. Generally, it should not be confused with, so I have not used the abbreviation objective data means O data and subjective data means yes data. I have kept it reserved. So there is yes data and O data, but it is not subjective data and objective data. So when data, and I will elaborate in another slide also when I will be discussing the key questions of the assessment. So this objective and subjective distinction is, self-report distinction is that self-report, when I am using say self-rated questionnaires, you are filling the questionnaires, or when I am taking an interview, the data or information that is coming is the self-report. But the O data is the others report. So when someone else, your parents are rating your behavior, your teacher is rating your behavior, your supervisor is rating your behavior, the clinician himself or herself is rating the behavior, then those data will be called O data. So self data and others data, this is the self report or other reports. So we generally encounter both type of data, and each data has its own limitation and strengths. We should be aware of the limitations and try to cope with them while making diagnosis. Now, as I said, the signs and symptoms are the most important, but I will discuss some core clinical databases that are used by the clinical psychologist for making a diagnosis. So this has been taken from Oxford Textbook of Psychiatry. So I give due credit to the Oxford Textbook of Psychiatry for using this in my presentation. And it is taken verbatim. So the first part is, and if you are making notes also, it is a good practice. I would say that do not rely on that you will get recordings. And so active learning is always helpful. If you can do, it is better. So first thing is identifying data. We must know who is the patient, what is his age, etc. Then the next important data is chief complaint. And this is the first person account of the patient or their attendants, that why they have come. If you ask, how can I help you? Then they say that I am having this and that problem. I came to you for this reason, that reason. So this is the chief complaints, means those things that has been reported directly by the client or their relatives and attendants. Then, based on the chief complaints, you start taking additional information. So you take the history of present illness. So any major symptoms, time course, stressors, and other information as you can see on the slide. Then you also take any past psychiatric history, whether the patient is having first time problems or similar problems occurred in the past. So these are the subheads. We also take the history of the drug abuse, substance abuse, use of illegal medicines and drugs like this. And then past medical history is another important component of the uh, clinical database. Then finally, for having some genetic dispositions or other things, we take family history of the psychiatric illness, and personal history is also taken because to understand the situation context of those problems, we try to understand whether the patient is educated or not educated, married, work history, whether he is employed, unemployed, or was employed but now have been uh, 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 fired from the job, like this. And then finally, as I said in the beginning, that signs and symptoms, they are collected by doing one thing, which is called mental status examination. And some of my colleagues will be discussing this mental status examination in detail because it is in the syllabus. But for the time being, you can see that in mental status examination, we try to understand the appearance, attitude, emotions, their behavior, their speech, their thought, cognition, insight, judgment, etc. So, from where and how we get these clinical data that I have just shared? So, these are the tools or sources of clinical data. So, the first thing is the subjective report of the client, the chief complaints that is shared, why you have come here. Then we do some interview. Some data may be coming through interview, some may be coming through observation of the behavior of the situation in the clinic or off the clinic. Then behavioral assessment may be used, behavioral rating scales, checklist may be used, psychological tests like psychometric and projective tests, they are also used to get some clinically relevant information or clinical data. We can also access the past record of the client like school, college reports, diaries, and third party information like caregivers, attendants, co-workers, classmates. They can also be contacted for getting additional clinical information. So these are the major important sources of clinical information, and some of them will be discussed in detail by other colleagues who are sharing these portions. For example, interview, behavioral assessment, these are in the syllabus where some teacher will be discussing it in detail. Now, let us come to the key questions for assessment. When we plan diagnostic assessment, we should focus on these important questions, make distinction between this, and then we will actually proceed towards the actual assessment process, which can be divided into different stages. So, the first important question that we should ask to ourselves as a clinician or as a clinical psychologist, that who is making the assessment? So if I am taking self-report questionnaire, self-report measures, then though it is provided by the clinical psychologist, but I am myself taking that assessment, and therefore the self-report measures will form as data that I have discussed just now. But sometimes we get information from others also. So if clinician is making assessment, if some third person is making assessment, then that will form O data. So this distinction is necessary, and we should plan how much and what type of information will be of yes type and how much and what information will be of O type after knowing the chief complaints of the patient. Both types of data are needed to have full assessment of the client, but the others data becomes important in certain particular cases, like when we are dealing with children who are not able to share their inner experiences. So for most of the childhood disorders, we rely more on O data and less on yes data. Similarly, substance abuse, we rely more on O data and less on yes data. Similarly, for personality disorders, there is importance of having some others report also. So it is not that only self-report will be sufficient. For certain condition, the others report will also be required. Then the second key question that we should know in the area of diagnostic assessment is what is being assessed. And what here may means two things: the subject of assessment and the variables of assessment both. In terms of subject of assessment, whether we are assessing the individual or his her environment. This is the distinction. So subject of assessment may the individual itself, himself, or his her environment may also be the subject of assessment. So why we assess environmental aspects? Because we are not operating in vacuum. We are always living in a socio-cultural environment, and the interaction of the person with the environment finally shapes the behavior. So understanding the psychopathological behaviors not require only assessment of individual functions like cognition, emotions that includes temperament and motivation, behavior that may include voluntary and involuntary like blood pressure. So that is also aspects of individual level. Both are needed, and we must decide how far individual information is required and how far environmental. Similarly, when it comes in terms of the variable of assessment, then we may need some unique specific assessment or information for the given client, and some information may be common to all that can be applied to all. So when we are using psychometric questionnaires, psychological tests, they are providing common information about all. But when we conduct case study interviews, then we are getting some specific information also that will otherwise not be available through the psychometric questionnaires. And there is a distinction you already know in the research methods that when we do in-depth study of a single individual, that is called idiographic approach, and when we assess the commonality of among the individuals, then that is called nomothetic assessment. So these distinctions should also be made. Now, another key question is where is the assessment taking place? Most of the times it is taking place in the clinic or laboratory setting. But sometimes, particularly in childhood conditions, we are required, or say in the area of rehabilitation, we are required to make the assessment in the natural setting. For example, if someone is having, say, some physical handicap and we are providing some rehabilitation, we will have to observe what natural obstacles he or she is facing. Similarly, if some child is having temper tantrum, then we can go in his or her house and we can see how and under what circumstances those symptoms occur. So this distinction is also needed, though most of the assessment take place in laboratory and clinical setting. Sometimes natural setting will be required. Another question is, when is the assessment occurring? So the assessment may be prospective or it may be retrospective. For example, if I provide a diary that you make a note how you felt during the next 1 week and then come next week with that diary, that will form a prospective assessment. So that assessment which has been planned well in advance is called prospective assessment, and retrospective assessment depends always on recall. So when I will, even in interviews, suppose I am doing and I will ask how you felt during the past few months, the patient will be providing information based on his or her recall. If I am using self-report questionnaires, whatever you are reporting in the questionnaire is not based on some prospective information, but it is based on retrospective information. You go back, recall, and report that in the questionnaire. So this distinction is also needed, and how far we are going for prospective assessment, how far it is required in our diagnostic case formulation, and how far retrospective assessment is required. Similarly, why is the assessment being undertaken? The reason for assessment, and this reason should not be confused with the reason for coming in the clinic, that is the chief complaints. So why we are taking under assessment? Sometimes, and for us, it is main thing, that is diagnosis. But if you are a counselor, you can do assessment for counseling purpose. If you are an OB specialized person, HRM person, you can do assessment for placement. So in any condition, the reason should be given clear, and here for psychodiagnosis, the only reason is the diagnosis, or sometimes it may be evaluation of the treatment efficiency or treatment effects. And thus, there is distinction between private and public data. In clinical settings, our data is most often the confidential data. We are bound to keep the confidentiality of the information gained from the client, and then this is private data. But in clinical settings, some, for example, if you will ask for education, grade, occupation, so if I am a teacher, that is publicly known that I am a teacher, it is in a public domain. But most often, the clinical data is of private nature, it is kept confidential, but it also rely on some public data. And the last question is, how is the assessment conducted? So, how we are presenting the assessment tools materials. So, it may be disguised. For example, if we are presenting RORSA card, the patient is not aware, the client is not aware for what this is, or he or she is being assessed. She simply knows that, or he simply knows that she is providing some associations, trying to see what is visible in the card. But based on that, we are trying to understand his personality, his cognition, his emotions. So this is a disguised presentation. It may be undisguised, like in psychometric questionnaires, you can read the content and know what is there. Similarly, another distinction is qualitative versus quantitative. So most often when we use psychometric tools, then the information is quantitative in nature. But when we get information from interview, observation, most often, not necessarily always, most often the data is qualitative in nature. And similarly, the data may be objective and subjective depending on the scoring. So if we are using RORSA, the data cannot be called objective because some subjective variations may occur in coding the response protocol. But when we are getting data for psychometric questionnaires, the data will be objective. So today, I would like to end with this last slide, that when we do assessment, in clinical setting for making a psychological diagnosis or diagnosis of a psychopathology. Most often, it refers to the process of classifying the individual, labeling the individuals in terms of known nomenclature of the psychopathology like DSM and ICD, understanding of the psychopathological conditions. But this process is a process which may have different stages. So this may include several stages, and generally most of the clinicians have distinguished between four stages of clinical assessment that I will elaborate in the next class. But before discussing, I will present an overview of the overall diagnostic assessment. This is the last slide, and I have 13 minutes yet. So this is again taken from some good information sources. Please try to focus on this. First, see the left side only and just have a look. The left side depicts the diagnostic process in clinical psychology or psychiatry. Now, switch your attention to the right side. The right side is also a process of diagnosis, but it is used most often by rehabilitation psychologists. And this is the diagnostic assessment of social and personal functioning. Those who will be specializing in rehabilitation psychology will go in detail. So let us begin with the left side because this is our focus. Then I will contrast with this and let you know something also. So generally, we know the reasons from the client why she has come, the complaints of the patient, and then based on those complaints, we try to collect information about the signs and symptoms. And when signs and symptoms are found to contribute or related with syndrome or a disorder, then we try to see whether some syndromes are present or not, or disorders are present or not. And these syndromes and disorders must be clinically recognized set of symptoms. Say, for example, as per DSM-5, as per ICD-11. And then we provide a provisional diagnosis to that. And based on these information, the case formulation is done. And this case formulation is an essential part of psychodiagnosis process. But here the process never ends. This is, remember, provisional diagnosis. Then you might have heard that there are several types of review meetings. So a case conference can be held in which the suppose patient is admitted, then the nursing staff providing the care, the doctors attending that patient, their relatives and attendants, and the patient himself may be presented in a form of conference, and everyone will share their information about the patient, and the case formulation may change and the diagnosis may change. So we do continuous review, and the final diagnosis, unfortunately, in psychiatry or clinical psychology comes when the patient fully recovers. Because if someone is, say, diagnosed for depressive disorder and I am providing antidepressant drugs, and if she is not cured by that, then it means that he is not having depression. But if she is cured by that, then we will be confirmed that he was having diagnosis. So generally towards the end of the therapy process, the final diagnosis is given. We always begin with this. And let's have a quick look at the right side. If we are doing assessment, again, the chief complaints will be the main starting point. But for functioning, we will focus on where there is any impairment or not. An impairment is any loss in a function of the organ and in physical body, or loss in any psychological function like cognition, emotion, etc. That will be impairment. Suppose I lost my thumb, then this will be called impairment. If I am having a deformity on my face, say there are several spots on my face, then that will be called impairment. And generally, these impairment may lead or may not lead to personal restrictions in the personal activities. So suppose I am not having this thumb, then I cannot play guitar. So there will be a restriction in my activity. I cannot write because for writing I will need the thumb to hold the pen. So these are the interference or restrictions in the personal activities, and this is called disability. But when this disability, suppose uh, I lost my tongue, but I am a manual laborer, just uh, helping the masons to do the construction work, then loss of tongue will not uh, interfere with my social role of a labor. But suppose I am a teacher and I lost my tongue, I cannot speak. I will become handicapped for teaching, but not handicapped. So how far these impairments and restrictions in personal activities interfere with social participation in carrying out your prescribed social roles, that defines handicap. And again, then you make a case formulation, and this is purely disability and rehabilitation area. And like ICD, ICIDH stands for International Classification of Impairment, Disability, and Handicap. And now ICIDH 2 is the latest version, and this graph is based on ICIDS 2. So thank you very much. If you are having any question or query, please ask.